Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It is my immense pleasure and privilege to be here this evening. I've had the very good fortune to be in some very exciting places in the world of transport, infrastructure, etc. And I want to share some of that inspiration with you this evening. I want to talk about not the abstract, but how we could transform transport for what I call England's Greater North. And my founding thesis, if you like, is transport doesn't do evolution, it powers and produces revolutions. So I know this one's a bit trite, but this is Fifth Avenue in New York in 1900. There is one automobile in the picture. 13 years later, there are no horses. Transport changes stuff, and it changes the way cities work, and it changes the way cities and people connect to each other. And guess what? Right here, we started the biggest revolution of the lot. That revolution started at a Manchester business leaders' dinner. Everybody in the room knew that the transport was, I'll use a polite phrase, outdated, and struggling to serve the northern economy. And I think we're all pretty much in agreement that that's the case today. But it's not today, it's 1826. And within 500 yards of where we are today, 76 Manchester business leaders got their act together, collectively decided to invest in something. That's what they invested in. And this is what you unleash when you do that. That is the map of the world's railways a few decades later. Basically, you can't see Europe because it's covered in it. Manchester unleashed the Industrial Revolution, built of steel and iron, powered by coal, and exported to the world, creating the finance mechanisms to build the thing. Yes, there were some bumps on the way, like the railway mania, the George Hudson issues, but what we're left with is a legacy infrastructure that served us pretty damn well for 200 years near on. Recently, transport across the north has been a live topic since 2003, and fully costed proposals were put on the table to government in 2008 of how we could do this really better. I know because I put those proposals on the table. At the time, that was for a maglev, a magnetic levitation train. And in order to make it comprehensible even to a Secretary of State for Transport, and I'm on my 19th, we had to montage a couple of things together. So what you see on the one side is a motorway in Shanghai where the traffic is traveling at 70 miles an hour. And on the left is the German-developed Transrapid maglev, which is traveling at 270 miles an hour. And then we had to montage the East Coast Main Line between York and Darlington down the middle. And in real time, this is what happens. Coming at you at 5 miles a minute, carrying 500 passengers, is the Transrapid. And it's off. Now, of course, we're waiting for the UK's transport to catch up. That saved me 1,000 words at conferences. What we were proposing at the time, we called it UK Ultra Speed, was not just the north-south, not just what HS2 is trying to do, but the link across the north, east-west, between Liverpool, between the Mersey and the Tyne, and east-west across the central belt of Scotland. What folk won't know is we came within a gnat's whisker of getting it built in Scotland between Edinburgh and Glasgow as a stage one, but the global banking crisis came along at precisely the wrong time and ate all the money, which was professionally frustrating. So what we're left with is HS2. HS2 goes from London to Birmingham. It has to because the southern end of the West Coast Main Line has run out of capacity. It's not about high speed at all, it's about capacity. This was noticed in the further northern reaches of England, where the Newcastle Journal commented that this was a lack of vision that would shame a pilchard in a tin. And then we get the big Y, and you might as well call it Y, yeah? Either side of the Pennines, yeah? No east-west links. If you want to travel from Leeds to Manchester, you've got to go to London. This really doesn't make sense. The only place on the network that's connected to every other place on the network is London. If you are trying to define a system that increases the economic dominance of London, you build HS2. But we live and learn. So, it's stood still since then. There's been a lot of reports written, a lot of consultancy commissioned. But the silver lining that nothing has happened is that there's no sunk investment here across the north in yesterday's solutions, which means that right here, right now, we're perfectly positioned to capitalize on some of the really exciting stuff that's going on. I'm going to talk about Hyperloop and other stuff in a minute, but I'll just start with a different example. So, on-demand, all-electric, personal aviation. The technology is now at flying prototype stage, and commercial services will start by 2021, 2022. That's the kind of time frame. There's 2 or 3 companies out there, all funded to the hundreds of millions of dollars level. And these 2 pieces of technology have a bit of history in terms of an aerial head-to-head. This is Germany versus Great Britain all over again. Both of these are flying full-scale prototypes. So what would that look like if you tried to deploy this technology from Liverpool to Manchester? Just take a local example. Well, first of all, it's vertical or short takeoff, so you can land anywhere. There's a flat bit. The top story of multi-story car parks comes in dead handy for this thing. And you can mirror that at the Manchester end. Then you can get from that point in Liverpool to that point in Manchester in 10 minutes. That changes the way the cities interact. But of course, it's not about getting from one point in Manchester to one point in Liverpool or vice versa. It's about getting from all of those points to all of those points, making it more attractive for more people to get from more origins to more destinations. So look at this in the abstract a bit. It's not about a line. It's about networks. Modern mobility is about networks. And critically, it's about integration of multiple modes of transport. So let's say you're there where the blue dot is in Liverpool and you want to get on one of these things to go to Manchester. You're going to need the first mile. That may well be an autonomous vehicle that comes and picks you up. This particular vehicle here has just received 130 million from the Bundesland Brandenburg in its development. It's autonomous. It's a 2-seater, but it can form itself into a platoon with up to 8 other vehicles, forming the shape of a bus, using the same road space as a bus, but can then split into 8 separate vehicles to deliver more people to where they want to go, when they want to go there. And then, of course, you need the final mile as well, which, to take the very local example of where we are right now, that could just be directions on your smartphone for walking from the landing zone to this particular building. And that's about individual mobility, not mass transit. The enabler is not the transport tech. The enabler is what sticks it all together. To use a technical term, the first mile, the final mile, and the bit in the middle. Yeah. So it's about getting from origins to destinations, and they can be multiple. You're not just in Piccadilly or Leeds Central Station. And the way you stick it together is digital. For customers, digital means a single tap to get from any origin to any destination. You don't care who the transport operator is. You want it to be on demand, you want it to be real time, and you need to plan and optimize your trip if you want to book in advance, or you just want to walk up. Your smartphone, whatever other device you're using, your glasses, or God knows the back of your retina in a few years' time, could be also your dynamic signage. It's walking you to the right place to be at the right time. And of course, it's single payment to many operators. You don't care if this is X Corp or Y Corp, providing your final mile and your bit in the middle. And for the network operators, it's also all about digital. It's about optimizing their fleet so that brutally put, the right number of vehicles are in the right place at the right time to meet the anticipated demand, which means real-time network management, which gives you over time predictive analytics of where do I need to put my resources to deal with the demand, and you incentivize smarter travel. So you might even go as far as negative fares to discourage people from traveling between 08:30 and 9 o'clock. You might actually pay them not to do that, because what that does, they'll make a few quid, but the economy, macro economy, makes a huge gain, because you've got more space for more people on your transport, which means more people will use that transport again. Utilization goes up. And of course, the interesting piece, probably blockchain authenticated, is secure payment and revenue sharing between operators. So that's the aviation bit in the middle. Let's have a look and see what we've got here. We've got 200 to 400 kmh. It's very, very networky because of the fundamental nature of the tech. It can get close to origins, close to destinations, but it's low capacity. But huge advantage, the core infrastructure is £0. It is free. The sky doesn't cost anything. Not yet. Somebody will find a way of charging for that, I'm sure. Yeah. Or you can go 1,000 kmh on the ground. The speed of aviation on the ground, and this is Hyperloop. So it's also networky by design. It's extremely high capacity. A Hyperloop network has effectively the same capacity as a high-speed rail network. That's what it's been designed to do. But the infrastructure and operational costs are an order of magnitude lower than rail. Infrastructure, because as you can see in this image here, it can be built elevated, which means as you get into the expensive bits of real estate, you don't have to buy a whole load of land. You just buy the land where the piers stand, and you do an air rights rental deal for the land underneath. And you can take out a huge amount of risk, which is utilities diversion. If between Pier 12 and Pier 13, you know that there are some buried utilities in the ground, if you're building a railway, you've got to dig them up, and about 20% of the capital cost of a new piece of infrastructure like that is in utilities diversion and the risks associated. Here, if you know there's a sewer in the ground, you just jump over it. It's that simple. So, not content with the theory, I had the huge privilege of working with some of the best engineers on the planet, and we actually went and built one. So Elon Musk had the first idea and then said, well, let's take a magnetic levitation train, let's slim it down, make it a pod, then let's put it in a tube, let's suck all the air out of the tube, producing an atmosphere 1/1000th of the density of the atmosphere we're all breathing now, and that'll make it go really, really fast. And it does. Every single cent of this is American startup business for you. Every single cent of this is privately funded. So, at the Nevada test site, where we have Andrews Air Force Base as a near neighbor, so security is pretty good. Here you'll see the experimental first pod. It sits on little wheels, and that's the levitation chassis that lifts it up when it starts to move. And you'll hear some of that later on. So Elon published a white paper in 2013, then said, look, I'm too busy trying to colonize Mars and Tesla and SpaceX, etc. You go ahead and build it. So we did. We also had to build a sort of Mars rover capable of working in a perfect, or a near perfect vacuum. So what you're looking at now is the main body of the structure is on the other side of this airlock. You're now on, if you like, the land side of the airlock, and this is just a small portion of the tube that you can pump up and down rapidly to change the sensors. The thing that looks like the waffle iron is what it slides into. So, moment of truth. After a couple of years of development, I mean only a couple of years, the door goes back, and the engineers here succeeded in accelerating this vehicle to the speed of a French TGV in less than 1 second. Yeah, I know people who pay for a ticket for that, but we won't be using it in public service, that acceleration rate. And shortly you'll hear the levitation. That's it levitated. It's now flying. And I love the Blade Runner sound. That is actually the sound of Hyperloop. It's so cool. Fortunately, the brighter of the engineers also worked out that they needed to invent a brake. Otherwise, it would have gone a very long way out of the other end of the tube. So on the back of that success, Hyperloop One became Virgin Hyperloop One, and I had the great privilege of presenting the company to Virgin and helping secure that investment. A process I would describe as not for the faint-hearted. So I don't want to oversell what Hyperloop's at. It's a proof of technology. There's a fully operational prototype. But critically, smart locations are already out there planning how to do it. In Europe, our competitors are, for instance, the Dutch and the Finns. Yeah. In the case of the Finns, they're not even really interested in it for the transport purposes because there's only 5 million Finns. They're interested in, can we be the domicile for the standards that actually set the standard for the safe, reliable operation of the next generation of transport. The Dutch want to solve the problem of the overcrowding in the Randstad. They've got a whole load of green fields at the other side of Holland, but no way of effectively connecting them together. But no surprise, Dubai is pretty much front of the queue. Sheikh Mohammed stuck his hand up pretty early on and said, could I have one, please? Yeah, they've got a problem to solve. They've got slightly bored of their platinum-plated 2-runway super airport, and they're building themselves a 5-runway super airport, and they need to collect them together to have a 7-runway super airport. Just pause for a moment and think how difficult 3 have been at Heathrow. And it's pretty much a 2-horse race for who gets there first, and prizes for guessing next location. It's India. This is a country whose economic success is causing demographic explosion. They have to link their megacities together, and they have to do that in a transformational way. So it's not about the tech. It's about transformation, fundamentally. And transformation really happens when you do 300 meters a second, which translates into those speeds there. It's about networking intelligently to transform economies. So if you talk to anybody about transport, they'll say transport's about A to B. And let's take an A to B, and let's say, just for the sake of argument, that the A to B we're looking at here is 300 kilometres, which, oops, just happens to be 186 miles, oops, just happens to be London to Manchester, oops, just happens to be what HS2 is trying to do. This is what happens in scale time between modes of transport. Hyperloop effectively destroys the distance. 18 minutes between London and Manchester. High-speed rail, 1 hour and 10. Pendolino on a decent railway, 2 hours and 10. And of course, if you're daft enough to try to drive from central London to central Manchester, your average speed will be 1 and 6pence, and it will take you 4 to 5 hours if you're lucky. Yeah, let's not go into the detail of that. So speed's one thing. Everybody gets speed. You know, it's Elon, it's shiny, it's fast. But speed is only one part of the equation because the geography's never that simple. It's never just about A to B. You've got other stuff going on, commuting, regional distribution. You've got new cities in the case of India. So schematically, a Hyperloop network has to connect everywhere to everywhere else. And this is the bit that gets me out of bed, gets me excited. Taking the protocols of internet packet switching, which are about optimum routing from any given starting point to any given finishing point, and applying them to transport. So a single tap on your phone takes you to your nearest Hyperloop terminal, and then you get on your pod. And every journey from every origin to every destination is non-stop. You don't need to know what the timetable is because there isn't one. You don't need to know what the network map is because from your perspective, it's just like tapping for an Uber. So in practice, what would that mean? That would mean changing our thinking. If we build a railway line from Piccadilly to Leeds, we'll end up with a line. But to take just a couple of examples, the West Yorkshire geography, there's potentially 14 million additional journeys that you don't serve with that line. And then Media City, 15,000 daily commutes, 31 million leisure visitors to the Trafford Centre, 23 million or whatever it is at the airport. So a Hyperloop network does that. It's a network. More connectivity, multiple origins and destinations, and of course, total integration of first mile and final mile traffic. So if you're at number 23 JB Priestley Street in Bradford, and you want to go to Marks and Spencer's in the Trafford Centre for the sake of argument. It is literally Marks and Spencer's in the Trafford Centre into your phone. The autonomous vehicle comes and picks you up, whatever it is, could be an Uber these days, delivers you to your nearest terminal, and then provides you walking directions, say to the deli counter at M&S at the end of your journey. Ultimately, what this is about is giving the North intercity travel at London Tube trip times, and this is where it gets really interesting from an economic perspective. Yes, I'm deliberately using this design iconography because it's recognized as a super good transport system that works on a metropolitan scale. And let's just take these three cities of the English North. What would a Hyperloop do between them? Liverpool to Manchester in 5 minutes, Manchester to Leeds, and I know there's a load of Leeds folk here who want to get home tonight after the event, we're 6 minutes. And because it doesn't stop in all of the locations, end to end is 8 minutes. That will take you a good deal longer today. So let's just have a look at how does all that compare to what's on offer. So here's the map. And Liverpool to Leeds, by today's train, fastest, 90 minutes. And here it goes, across Stevenson's Chat Moss route through Manchester, and then technically a pretty wiggly bit through Yorkshire. So we're told that this problem will be solved by Northern Powerhouse Rail, which means building a railway between one point in Manchester and one point in Leeds, which kind of misses the network point, but let's let it run, and a railway from Liverpool to Manchester Airport. Now, aficionados of east-west journeys across the north may have spotted there's a tiny technical flaw with this plan, which is you can't have it till 2023 because it relies on that bit of HS2 being built to provide a through route. And frankly, don't hold your breath for phase 2 of HS2. Also, in the long term, we're all dead. I'm certainly well into my bus pass by 2033, I should say, and I suspect many of us will be a lot older and wiser by then. Second little problem, as you may see from the schematic, HS2 actually faces the wrong way at Piccadilly for some curious reason. Therefore, you'd have to massively redesign Piccadilly or reverse, which destroys capacity on railway systems. Then on the networky front, places like Bradford and Warrington, just to take two examples, how can you do them? City centre stations may be hugely expensive, or if you do parkways on the edge of cities, you just clog up the roads and make the problem, shift the problem. So I would go as far as saying HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Railways are yesterday's lines on a map, and they will fail our economy. So long term, we must be planning for, funding and building a best-in-world network with the purpose of linking our great cities, so that our brilliant graduates from our excellent universities don't have to become success refugees fleeing to the south or Los Angeles for their jobs because there isn't a big enough labour pool up here. If you've got Livchester as a concept, you've put those two places together. I know there are Mancunians and Scousers who would reject that to the grave, but, However, there are some short-term wins to be had. We don't have to spend the big bucks from day one. I'm going to conclude now with one that we could have now. Back to the map. Let's just take an actual Transpennine Express route from Liverpool to Scarborough. So the green bits are electrified. The red wiggly bits are non-electrified. So you go through Leeds, you get a bit. And as you go through York, you get a bit of electrification. And then you get to Scarborough, and you've had to run, these days, on diesel. For context, these are the electrified lines of the West Coast Main Line when they finally finish the Farnworth Tunnel and connect via Bolton. And this is the electrified stuff on the East Coast Main Line. So you can see, north-south is pretty good in terms of conventional railways, but east-west, underinvested, neglected for decades. Let's strip this back to a schematic. What would it mean if we could do electrification without having to wait for the electrification to come along? If our cities are here, and these are the kilometres that separate them, green bits being electric, red bits being currently non-electrified, it's about the batteries. Tesla and others have pushed energy density in batteries and the charging rate to the rate that it becomes possible to do that. So charging up whilst you're actually running under the wires, think of it as a giant Tesla supercharger that happens conveniently to be strung all the way from Liverpool to Manchester in that case. What that enables you to do is think radically different. This is the very train, the 2019 Nova 3, that's been procured to do Liverpool to Scarborough. If you did it this way, just delete the diesel. All 89 tons of polluting, outmoded yesterday's tech, and stick a bit of battery and a pantograph on top, and you've got an all-electric train without waiting for Network Rail to build the electric infrastructure. The eagle-eyed will have spotted, of course, that if you've got to Scarborough, you need to come back. And that'll mean you arrive in Liverpool with slightly less electricity in the tank than you started with. So you need to fill it up. So how are you going to do that? Well, as you turn round under the wires in Liverpool, you're sat there, you're not burning any power, you're just picking it up. You could build literally 30 metres of overhead wire at Scarborough, and whilst you sat there for 11 minutes turning around, you can zap down several megawatts. And pick a couple of locations, Malton and Huddersfield. You know the train's going to stop there for a couple of minutes. You don't have to electrify the route, you have to electrify a few hundred metres of it to get the benefits of electrification. So that's what we're looking at now. That's on test at the Velim test site in Czech Republic. And that's what pulls it. It's a diesel engine, and it's got a fatal flaw. It's actually pretty overt about what its flaw is. There's a sticker on the side that says danger, overhead live wires. And it spends 30 to 70% of its time under the overhead live wires, but it has no means of connecting to them. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we can do a whole load better than that. It's not danger, it's opportunity. And that's an opportunity to just think slightly differently and solve a problem we have today using technologies that are available today. So we're asking ourselves fundamentally, how do we get world-class modern mobility for the Greater North? It could be the easy stuff like the battery trains, and the long term it's the difficult stuff like the Hyperloop. And it's about the Greater North taking action itself, not waiting for Whitehall. And I firmly believe, after 2 decades in this game, that it's not for government to take the lead, it is for business to take the lead. Remember those Manchester business people sat in the room in 1826, ladies and gentlemen, you are those people today. So, it'd be a Greater North Transport Company. The first stage of that company would design a comprehensive modern mobility solution. That would be both physical and, I stress, digital. And it would own the IP. Notice it's a kind of digital model. It would then exit or roll over to the development company, which defines a specific project and secures the finance. It owns the rights to implement the project. And stage two pays a license to stage one. And then, if you've been with us for the long haul, you get to delivery. And this is a competitively procured consortium to operate the projects, and it buys the rights. Just to map it, orders of magnitude of money that you need to do these kind of stages, 500,000 to 2 million through stage one, 20 million to 200 million, and the back end of stage 2 is where you start putting in the planning applications, the hybrid bills. And then 500 million to 2 billion is kind of the ticket for a sort of Leeds to Manchester kind of segment. And the lower end of that would be, for instance, the autonomous aviation. And just mapping that against startup culture. What we're talking about now is doing a seed round, then an A round. This is B, C, and if you're with us with a long haul, this is the IPO or the trade sale. When you get to the point, you say, go ahead and build it. So, I'm delighted to say that Greater North Transport will be opening for Founders Round investment in mid-2019. You can register your interest right now at gnt.org.uk, and to make it memorable, make mine a GNT. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.